Have you ever considered how a simple mechanical evolution could act as the ultimate anti-theft device in the modern world? In an era dominated by automatic transmissions and self-driving features, the art of operating a manual gearbox has become a dying skill among the general population. This technological shift has inadvertently created a fascinating subset of criminals who possess the ambition to steal high-value vehicles, but lack the fundamental coordination to move them an inch. Tonight on Midnight Docket, we delve into a humiliating yet fascinating case from the late 1990s, where a career criminal met his match not in a locked vault or a security guard, but in the form of a third pedal and a stick shift. The story serves as a bizarre intersection of changing automotive culture and criminal incompetence. The year was 1998, and the setting was the gritty industrial outskirts of Chicago, Illinois. The city was in the midst of a transition, dealing with the remnants of old organized crime, while facing a new wave of disorganized, opportunistic theft. In this chaotic landscape lived a man named Leo Moretti, who was known on the streets for his ability to crack residential locks, but possessed a glaring gap in his automotive knowledge. Leo had spent his entire driving life behind the wheel of automatic sedans and vans, never once needing to engage a clutch or shift gears manually. This lack of experience would soon become the catalyst for one of the most embarrassing police reports ever filed in the history of the Chicago Police Department. On the other side of this equation was a pristine vehicle that was the envy of every car enthusiast in the greater Chicago area. It was a 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429, a rare muscle car painted in a deep raven black. The owner was a retired surgeon named Dr. Marcus Thorne, who treated the vehicle with more care than he did most of his patients. Dr. Thorne kept the Mustang stored in a reinforced garage behind his Victorian home in the Lincoln Park neighborhood. The car was not just a mode of transportation, it was a piece of American history that required a specific set of skills to operate. The heavy clutch and the sensitive throttle made it a beast that only a seasoned driver could tame. Leo Moretti had been scouting the Thorne residence for weeks after hearing rumors about the valuable muscle car from a fence at a local dive bar. The intel was solid, and Leo knew that if he could get the car to a chop shop across state lines, he could earn enough money to retire from the life of petty crime. He spent nights watching the house, learning the doctor's schedule, and noting the lack of a sophisticated electronic alarm system on the detached garage. To Leo, it looked like an easy score. He assumed that once he bypassed the padlock and hot-wired the ignition, driving away would be the simplest part of the operation. The night of the heist was a cold and foggy Tuesday in November, providing the perfect natural cover for illicit activities. The streetlights struggled to penetrate the mist, creating deep shadows that Leo used to his advantage as he crept through the alleyway behind the Thorne residence. He carried a small duffel bag containing his lock, picks, a flashlight, and a heavy crowbar just in case finesse failed him. His heart pounded with a mix of adrenaline and greed as he approached the garage side door. He was confident in his plan and completely unaware that the machine waiting inside required a physical dialogue. He did not know how to speak. Leo worked on the side door lock with practiced precision, and within 2 minutes, the tumblers clicked into place, allowing him silent entry. The smell of oil and old leather hit him immediately, a sensory confirmation that he had found the prize. He clicked on his flashlight, keeping the beam low to avoid alerting the neighbors or the doctor sleeping in the main house. The beam swept across the garage floor and up the side of the black Mustang, reflecting off the chrome bumper. It was more imposing than he had imagined, a sleeping giant of steel and horsepower that seemed to fill the entire space. Moving quickly, Leo approached the driver's side door and used a slim gym tool to slide the lock open without shattering the glass. He slipped into the driver's seat and was immediately struck by how different the interior felt compared to the stolen Honda Civics and Toyota Camrys he was used to. The steering wheel was large and thin, and the dashboard was a collection of analog dials. Between the seats rose a Hurst shifter, topped with a white ball knob. Leo ignored the diagram etched onto the knob, assuming it was just a decoration or a simple forward and back mechanism. He reached under the dash to pull the wires for the ignition. The process of hot wiring the vintage Ford was surprisingly simple for a man of his talents, as older cars lacked the complex immobilizers found in modern luxury vehicles. He stripped the wires and touched them together, sparking the ignition system to life. The engine roared with a thunderous, aggressive idle that shook the entire garage frame. The sound was much louder than Leo anticipated, echoing off the concrete wall like a cannon blast. Panic surged through him instantly. He knew he had seconds to get the car out of the garage and down the alley before lights would flick on in the main house. Leo grabbed the shifter and tried to jam it into what he thought was drive, but the stick refused to move in a linear fashion. He looked down in confusion, seeing the H pattern for the first time in the dim light of the dashboard. He realized he needed to move it left and up for first gear. He shoved the stick into position and stomped on the gas pedal, expecting the car to lurch forward. Instead, the engine screamed at a high RPM, but the car remained stationary. He had not depressed the clutch pedal. The car was in neutral despite the stick position, because he had not engaged the gears properly with the transmission. Sweat began to bead on his forehead as he looked down at the floor and saw 3 pedals instead of 2. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He was sitting in a manual transmission vehicle, and he had no idea how to coordinate his feet. He pressed the far left pedal, the clutch, all the way to the floor and jammed the stick into first gear again. This time he felt it click. He slammed his foot onto the gas pedal while simultaneously popping his foot off the clutch. The car bucked violently forward 3 feet and then stalled with a sickening clunk, silence returning to the garage. Inside the main house, Dr. Thorne had been roused from his sleep by the initial roar of the engine. He sat up in bed, confused for a moment, before realizing the sound came from his own backyard. He grabbed the phone on his nightstand and dialed 911, his hands shaking with rage and fear. He moved to the window overlooking the backyard and saw the garage door was still closed, but he could hear the distinct sound of his Mustang engine trying to turn over again. The thief was trapped inside, or so it seemed, struggling to make his escape. Back in the garage, Leo was in a state of full-blown panic as he turned the ignition again, praying for the engine to catch. It roared back to life, filling the space with exhaust fumes. He tried to be gentler this time, easing his foot off the clutch while pressing the gas. However, he gave it too much gas and not enough clutch, causing the tires to spin on the smooth concrete floor before the car lurched forward and stalled a second time. The violent motion threw him against the steering wheel, bruising his chest. He was mere feet from the garage door, but he could not get the car to move smoothly. The garage filled with blue smoke from the burning clutch, and the exhaust making it hard to breathe and stinging his eyes. Leo coughed violently, but refused to give up on the prize. He tried a third time, managing to get the car moving in a jerky spasm. The Mustang shot forward and smashed through the wooden garage doors, splintering the wood and sending debris flying into the alley. He was out. He was free. But now he had to navigate the narrow alleyway and turn onto the main street, all while managing a vehicle that seemed determined to fight him every inch of the way. As he reached the end of the alley, Leo attempted to stop to check for traffic. He slammed on the brake, but forgot to depress the clutch. The car shuddered violently and stalled again right at the mouth of the alleyway, blocking the exit partially. He cursed loudly, slamming his hands against the steering wheel. He could hear sirens in the distance, getting louder with every passing second. He turned the key again, but the engine was flooded, and it sputtered reluctantly before catching. He was wasting precious time fighting the mechanics of the car, rather than escaping the scene. He finally managed to get the car moving again, turning right onto the main residential street. He stayed in first gear because he was terrified to shift and lose momentum. The engine whined at a dangerously high pitch as he drove at 20 miles per hour, the tachometer needle buried in the red zone. The noise was deafening, announcing his presence to everyone in a 5-block radius. He knew he needed to shift to second gear to go faster, but every time he thought about moving his feet, his brain froze in terror of stalling again. A patrol car turned the corner 2 blocks ahead, its lights flashing red and blue against the night sky. Leo saw them and panicked completely. He tried to shift into second gear, without using the clutch, forcing the stick with brute strength. A horrible grinding noise erupted from the transmission as metal gears gnashed against each other. The car did not go into gear. Instead, it slipped into neutral, and the engine revved freely, while the car began to coast and slow down. Leo stomped on the gas, but the disconnect between the engine and the wheels meant he was going nowhere. The police cruiser closed the distance rapidly, the officers inside likely confused by the erratic behavior of the stolen vehicle. They saw the Mustang lurching, revving, and coasting in a bizarre dance. Leo finally slammed the clutch down and found a gear, but in his panic, he shifted into reverse instead of second. He let the clutch out, and the tires screeched backward. The car shot in reverse, mounting the curb and slamming the rear bumper into a fire hydrant. Water geysered into the air, raining down on the beautiful black paint. The impact jolted Leo, violently causing his head to snap back against the headrest. The engine stalled for the final time. He sat there for a moment, dazed and defeated, surrounded by the smell of burnt rubber and the sound of rushing water. The police cruiser pulled up alongside him, and 2 officers stepped out with their weapons drawn. They did not need to chase him on foot. Leo Moretti, the man who could pick any lock in Chicago, was defeated by a stick shift and a clutch pedal. He raised his hands, slowly, knowing the game was over. The arrest was humiliatingly simple. Officer James Miller approached the driver's side door and opened it, finding Leo sitting with his hands up and a look of utter resignation on his face. When asked to step out of the vehicle, Leo stumbled slightly, his legs shaking from the adrenaline and the physical exertion of fighting the car. As Officer Miller cuffed him, he looked into the car and noticed the shifter. He chuckled and asked Leo if he even knew how to drive a stick. Leo did not answer. He just stared at the ground, wishing he could vanish into the fog. The aftermath of the failed robbery was a mix of legal proceedings and public ridicule. The police report detailed the sequence of stalls and the grinding gears, painting a picture of a thief completely out of his element. The local newspapers picked up the story, running headlines like "The Stick Shift Bandit" and "The Thief Who Stalled." It became a humorous anecdote in a city weary of violent crime, a moment of levity provided by the sheer incompetence of the perpetrator. For Dr. Thorne, the damage to the car was heartbreaking but repairable. Dr. Thorne testified at the trial, describing the terror of waking up to the sound of his beloved car being abused. He spoke about the rarity of the vehicle and the specialized skill required to drive it. The defense attorney tried to paint Leo as a desperate man caught in a bad situation, but the prosecution used the comedy of errors to show that Leo was a career criminal who simply lacked the skills for this particular job. The jury found Leo guilty of grand theft auto and destruction of property. He was sentenced to 5 years in state prison. While in prison, Leo became a bit of a legend, but not for the reasons a convict usually desires. Other inmates mocked him for his inability to drive the getaway car. He spent his time in the prison library reading books about automotive mechanics, determined to understand the machine that had bested him. He learned about gear ratios, clutch plates, and flywheels. It was a little too late for his criminal career, but it gave him a sense of closure to understand the mechanical forces he had fought against that night in the alley. The incident also sparked a conversation in the automotive community about the decline of manual transmission proficiency. Car enthusiasts used the story as proof that driving a stick shift was a lost art form that needed to be preserved. Driving schools in Chicago saw a brief spike in enrollment for manual transmission courses, as people did not want to be as helpless as the thief in the news. The story of the Mustang and the incompetent thief became a cautionary tale passed down in car clubs and mechanic shops. Dr. Thorne eventually had the Mustang fully restored, the rear bumper replaced, and the transmission rebuilt. He continued to drive the car for another decade, taking it to car shows and telling the story of the night it was almost stolen. He often joked that he did not need an alarm system because the transmission was the best security feature money could buy. The car became famous in its own right, known as the Mustang that arrested its own thief. As the years passed, automatic transmissions became even more ubiquitous, eventually surpassing manuals in performance and fuel economy. The manual gearbox was relegated to sports cars and enthusiast models, making it even rarer on the American roads. The generation of drivers who could operate a stick shift continued to shrink, turning the skill into a niche ability. The story of Leo Moretti became a marker of this transition, a snapshot of a time when not knowing how to drive stick could cost you your freedom. Leo was released from prison 5 years later, a changed man. He never returned to car theft, having learned his lesson in the most public way possible. He found work as a locksmith, using his skills for legal purposes. He reportedly bought a bicycle to get around the city, avoiding cars altogether for the first few years of his freedom. The trauma of that night in the Mustang stayed with him, a constant reminder of his limitations. The legacy of this crime is a reminder of how technology shapes our lives and our criminal underbelly. As cars become computers on wheels, the nature of theft changes. Hackers replace hotwirers, and digital keys replace lockpicks. But for a brief moment in the late 90s, the physical connection between man and machine was the deciding factor in a crime. The raw mechanical nature of the manual transmission stood as a barrier that could not be hacked or bypassed, only mastered. Today, the Mustang sits in a private collection, having been sold after Dr. Thorne passed away. The new owner keeps a framed copy of the old newspaper article in the trunk, a testament to the car's history. The scratches on the fire hydrant were eventually painted over, and the garage door was replaced, but the story remains. It serves as a humorous chapter in the dark book of true crime, a story where the victim was the victor simply because he drove a harder car. In retrospect, the failure of Leo Moretti highlights the importance of preparation and knowing one's limits. Had he stolen an automatic sedan, he likely would have vanished into the night, never to be caught. His ambition outstripped his ability, leading to his downfall. It is a classic tragic flaw played out in the theater of a foggy Chicago alley, with a soundtrack of grinding gears and stalling engines. So the next time you see a car with a manual shifter, remember the night it acted as a guardian. Remember the thief who sat in the driver's seat of a powerful machine and found himself powerless. In a world rushing toward automation, there is something satisfying about a mechanism that requires human skill and engagement to function. It is a reminder that sometimes the old ways are the best ways, especially when it comes to foiling the plans of the unprepared.